Welcome to this Bloom Talk. My name is David Nowacki. I'm a director in our advisory services practice. I'm here today to talk to you about SOC2. What is SOC2? How do you get ready for a SOC2 audit? And what are the steps that you ultimately need to take to achieve a positive SOC2 audit report? So how do we achieve a SOC2 audit report? This concept is called Couch to SOC2. How do you get there from zero and ultimately achieve a positive audit report? The agenda for today is to talk about what your roadmap looks like. How do you select the right SOC2 for you, and what discussion needs to be had in order to determine that? What is a readiness assessment? What can we do to help you achieve readiness? How do you close the gaps, and how long does it take? And ultimately, how do you prepare for your audit? Here's a visual that shows Couch and ultimately a SOC audit report. So it's an iterative approach that allows you to select the type of audit, prepare, remediate gaps, and ultimately achieve an audit report. So how do we get started? So you need a SOC2. There are drivers that are involved in determining that, one, you do need a SOC2, and two, determining what type of SOC2 audit you need to have. SOC2 is all about security. So generally it's a prerequisite for one of your customers, or an ongoing requirement for you to achieve an independent evaluation of your security posture. SOC 2 is not about financial reporting. That's SOC 1, and that'll come in a different topic at a later date. The intended users of your report, you need to look at your customers. Is it a specific customer or is it not? Is it a broad range of customers? Are you trying to display your security prowess in a certain way? That feeds into what type of audit you ultimately select and what SOC 2 criteria you want yourself evaluated against. There's also this concept of a type 2 versus a type 1. One is a point-in-time assessment, the other is a evaluation of your controls over a period of time. So you need to think about these things as you're determining what approach you need to take to achieving SOC 2. A quick overview. It is, in fact, a audit report on controls at your organization that impact security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and or privacy. So it can be all of these things, but it has to be security at a minimum. It is not a certification, and it's not a compliance standard. It's an audit report where an independent auditor will review your controls. And it's designated for customers typically who have an interest in your security. You perform a function, you're part of their vendor management process, and so you end up receiving questions and inquiries about what you're doing to secure their infrastructure or secure their data. As I mentioned before, there are 5 criteria standards. They're called trust service principles and the related criteria. The overarching one is security in general, and then there's additional ones that you can include criteria for. And again, that's confidentiality, availability, processing integrity, and privacy. So simplifying SOC 2, the security trust service principle and related criteria, you are evaluated on 32 individual criteria. Those are mandatory. If you receive a SOC 2 audit, you have to be evaluated against those criteria. You can select additional criteria that may apply to your organization. In some cases, you may be required by contract to have them included. So availability, if you have any service commitments like uptime or disaster recovery, you may want to include those criteria. Confidentiality, if you are protecting information that's non-personal but could be confidential, think system specifications or diagrams, design documents. In some cases, you're processing mortgage data that isn't identified as an individual, or financial information, but it's not personal information. You may want to include confidentiality. Processing integrity is typically if you're doing transaction processing calculations or doing anything in the big data or machine learning space. And then privacy is pretty clear. It's a healthcare and financial services only. Here's a quick overview of what a point-in-time assessment, a Type 1 versus a Type 2 operating effectiveness audit. Again, the best testament to your controls is probably the Type 2 audit. It shows how they operated over a period of time, typically 6 months or 12 months. The Type 1 is an audit of the design of controls as of a specified date. So what's a readiness assessment? In a readiness assessment, Bloom Shapiro will put our advisor hat on and help you evaluate how you're doing against the SOC2 criteria, this starts typically with a self-assessment process. We'll give you some questionnaires and some templates to evaluate where you are, what types of policies, procedures, and controls you have in place, and then we'll go through and facilitate some walkthroughs to interpret the criteria, give you suggestions, and ultimately recommendations for how you close the gaps. Here's a visual of what a readiness assessment template may look like. In this case, it's an example of encryption. Encryption is a security control that most organizations need to be deploying, and the types of criteria you would be evaluated against. You'll see the yes-no determination as to whether or not the control is in place. Is it auditable? Can we verify that? And then ultimately notes for remediating any gaps or implementing new controls. How long does a readiness assessment take? It depends on your organization, your preparedness, but typically it's about 4 to 6 weeks. There are things that can drive that forward a little bit quicker. 3 to 4 weeks is probably the fastest that seems reasonable. And we can certainly step in and do more hand-holding if necessary. Remediating the gaps. So the types of gaps and your preparedness and your budget typically dictates the length of period before you can actually undergo an audit. So most common gaps include lack of documentation, policies, and procedures, or accumulating evidence, but there are instances where you need to purchase new technologies and deploy new technologies. How do you prepare for the audit? Simple. It's address all gaps, ensure your controls are implemented and auditable, meaning you can verify them using some form of evidence, and ultimately you need to describe your system, all of its boundaries, and your controls, and that's what you're ultimately audited against. And if you select a Type 2 audit, you need to make sure that all of those controls have operated effectively during the period and that there's auditable evidence to verify. The only time this would be an issue is if you have an annual control or a quarterly control that may not occur that often. Think external vulnerability assessment or a disaster recovery test that aren't done that frequently, perhaps quarterly or annually. How long until I get an audit report? Well, this is the couch to SOC 2 concept, depends on a lot of things. Your readiness, the types of gaps, and ultimately the length of the audit. So a Type 1 audit, we can start the audit as soon as you remediate the last gap and have your system described. So the time frames are typically 8 to 12 weeks for the audit report, plus the original time to do the readiness and remediate gaps. A realistic picture is probably somewhere between 12 to 16 weeks from the first time we do the readiness assessment to 6 months or more, depending on how long it takes you to remediate gaps. In a SOC 2 audit, there are a lot more complicators, and so a realistic time frame is probably 6 months to ensure that your controls have operated during a reasonable amount of time, and that's 6 months after you complete the readiness assessment. 9 to 12 months is more realistic, and so a typical couch to SOC 2 timeline for a Type 2 audit is about 9 months or more, but typically this takes more than a year. And ultimately, your approach to SOC 2 is determined by what you want it to achieve. So if you're trying to display your competitive advantage and just show some progression toward security, you can take a more gradual approach, like a readiness assessment and then a Type 1 audit, and add the Type 2 later on. Whereas if you're bound contractually to achieve a Type 2, you need to take a more aggressive approach to SOC 2 compliance. I hope this clarified some things on SOC 2 for you today. If you'd like to get off the couch and start your journey to SOC 2, contact us for more information.